Now, a while back, we went to Rowland's castle, where the Villagers Association was trying to raise funds for a unique train model. It shows how the village probably looked in the run-up to D-Day, and it took almost 7 years to finish. Fortunately, Rowland's Castle Association didn't need years to gather the money, and they now brought the layout to its spiritual home. Our reporter Nicole Ris followed the tracks to find out more.
This train model is a snapshot in time. It depicts the build-up to D-Day in Rowland's Castle 1944, and when it was offered for sale to the Villagers Association, all wheels were set in motion to raise the money for the £8,000 layout.
The main push started in July when we had the village fair. We had a little table and some pictures of the poster we made up of the railway, asking people for donations and explaining why we wanted to purchase the railway. It's been offered for sale, and where else could it go? Where it came from, its original spiritual home, as we called it, and people's enthusiasm was obvious. It was only up for a few hours, but lots of people got in touch, left their names, addresses, telephone numbers and emails, etc. So we could contact them afterwards, and the ball started rolling. Some people put in £5 and some have put in a lot more. So with all these sort of funding things, every bit counts.
After the successful funding, the model has now been unveiled to train enthusiasts and donors, giving them a very detailed insight in what the village might have looked like just before D-Day.
The green was turned from its sort of leisure activity. It is now into a holding place for the tanks. The forest in Stansted was used for hiding the troops' camp, so they were under the trees, in the trees, and they used it as a training ground as well. It is exact in scale. It's exact in that the buildings predicted are still there. Some of them have been altered, slightly updated. But the railway runs alongside the green in the model, which it doesn't actually do in real life. But a model has to be an oval, has to go around, the train has to go around and come back again.
The mastermind behind the unique layout is Peter Goss. Before he was a railway modeler, he made military models. And adding Peter's particular interest in World War II at the time, the ball started rolling.
At the time I had an interest in World War II vehicles, so it made sense to look at a World War II sort of scene. And then in particular perhaps the build-up to the D-Day landings, which mainly happened in the south of England, where although troops and equipment came from all the rest of England, it congregated in the south. So we came to the D-Day Museum in Portsmouth. And one of the books I purchased was Hampshire and D-Day, and in there it mentioned the village of Rowland's Castle. It was a detraining station at the time of the build-up, which means that it was one of the principal stations that all the equipment came to. So it was only 8 miles away, so we thought, well, we've been past this place on the way down, so let's go and have another look at it. And we did, and we fell in love with the place. The buildings are quite particular. They're very a lot of listed buildings, or in a preservation sort of sense, and I liked the feel of the place. The bridges were quite ornate with all the flint and brick detailing, so that's how we decided on the place. And we got hold of a 1932 Ordnance Survey plan of the village, which immediately identified the buildings that were there at that time, which therefore, if they're there now, must have been there during the 1940s. So that eliminated the modern houses, so that left me with the 1932 buildings. So I picked a few buildings that I felt I wanted to model.
All the items displayed are painted by hand, and it took Peter almost 7 years to finish the model, a time in which he also encountered challenges.
The figures I've used on the layout had to be specific period figures, a lot of military, obviously, inclusions in that. And then the military side of it, obviously all the vehicles, that had to be researched, what units were actually here. And we had to research those units and make sure we were right. I also went to the National Railway Museum to start researching trains of the period, finding out what they looked like. Because during wartime there was not a lot of photographs taken, not a lot of records were kept. Then of course the problem is, how do you make the trains look like the period trains? Because you can't buy some of this stuff, so I have to make it. So I obtained drawings and some of the pictures that I managed to find in archives, and we conjured up the trains and bought proprietary items that were closely matched to it, and I converted them to make them exactly right.
The Rowland's Castle Association are now looking for an ideal place to put the train model on display full-time. Nicole Ris for That's Solent.